My son gave me an all-expenses Montana fishing trip as a gift. But when I came home early, I overheard him on the phone. The cold water will make it look like an accident. So I smiled and thought, all right, son, let's see who survives this. The house was supposed to be empty. That's why I came in quietly. My suitcase still smelled like lake water and pine needles. Montana clung to my clothes. The cold air, the silence, the feeling that something about that trip had never sat right with me. My son thought I was still there. 3 more days. That was the plan. I set the suitcase down softly near the door, and that's when I heard his voice. From the kitchen. Low. Careful. The kind of voice people use when they believe no one is listening. I moved slowly down the hallway. Every step deliberate, every floorboard a potential betrayal. Then the sentence drifted through the half-open kitchen door. Soft, casual, terrifying. Yeah, the cold water will make it look like an accident. Silence followed. The kind of silence that presses against your skull. I stopped breathing. My heart didn't race. It slowed. Like my body understood something my mind hadn't fully caught yet. My son continued. I told him the fishing spot was isolated. Nobody around for miles. Another pause. A faint laugh. Quiet. Nervous. But yeah. Hypothermia works fast up there. Something inside my chest cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet fracture. Like ice splitting beneath someone's feet. I leaned against the hallway wall and stared at the family photos hanging beside me. There he was, 8 years old, holding the first fish I ever helped him catch. He had smiled like the world belonged to him, and I had believed it did. Now I stood there in my own house, listening to my son calmly discuss my death. I closed my eyes. And slowly, very slowly, I smiled. All right, son, let's see who survives this. I didn't walk into the kitchen. Not yet. That would have been emotional. And emotion is sloppy. Instead, I stepped back toward the front door as quietly as I had entered. Then I shut it. Hard, loud enough to echo through the house. Footsteps scrambled inside. The phone call ended abruptly. I stepped into the kitchen seconds later. My son turned toward me, surprise flashing across his face. Dad? His eyes flicked to my suitcase. You're back already? I nodded calmly. Fishing was slow. A lie. The fish had been biting, but the guide kept insisting we move to deeper water, further out, away from shore, where the current was stronger, where the water was darker and colder. I hadn't fallen in. But I had noticed how often the guide looked at me when the boat rocked, like he was waiting for something, for me to slip, or maybe for permission. My son watched me closely. You said you'd be gone another 3 days. Changed my mind. I opened the fridge and poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. I studied him over the rim of the glass. He looked nervous, not shocked, just adjusting, calculating, the same way I used to calculate business deals. He had learned it from me. That realization settled deep in my chest. Heavy, quiet. Trip was your idea, I said casually. He shrugged. Thought you deserved a vacation. I nodded slowly. Of course, a vacation. In a remote part of Montana, where lakes swallow bodies quietly, where accidents are common, where the water temperature can stop a heart in minutes. I finished my drink, set the glass down, then looked directly at him. Strange thing, though. He stiffened. What? The guide. What about him? I smiled faintly. He seemed disappointed when I didn't fall in. The silence that followed was fascinating, a microsecond too long. Then my son laughed. Too quickly. You're paranoid, Dad. Maybe, but paranoia keeps people alive. And something told me this story had already been written. I just needed to read the rest of it. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear. Fear is loud. This was quieter. A slow rearranging of memories, like pieces of a puzzle finally turning the right direction. The fishing trip. My son insisting I go alone. The specific lake he chose. The guide who already knew my name before I introduced myself. Little details. Sharp details. They began forming a pattern. So I started digging, quietly. The next morning, I checked the payment for the trip. It hadn't come from my son's account. The receipt showed a different card. A company account. One I recognized immediately. My own. I sat there staring at the screen. Interesting, very interesting. Then I opened another file. The will, the version I had updated 6 months ago. In that version, my son inherited everything. House, investments, insurance, nearly $4 million. I leaned back in my chair, slowly exhaled. Money changes people. But this was efficient. Cold. Strategic. Exactly how I had taught him to be. I checked phone records next. He had called the Montana guide 3 times the week before my trip. Long calls, long enough to arrange something detailed. And then I found the last piece. Life insurance. Recently increased. $2 million. Primary beneficiary. My son. I sat there for a long time. Not angry, not even sad. Just studying the design. The precision. My son hadn't planned a murder. He had planned an accident. One that left him grieving. Sympathetic. Rich. And free. The elegance of it almost impressed me. Almost. But he had made one mistake. He underestimated me. He assumed age meant weakness. That experience fades. That instincts dull. But survival sharpens a man. And I had survived far worse than betrayal. So I printed the documents. Every single one. Then placed them neatly in a folder. My son walked into the kitchen later that evening. "Working late again?" he asked. I nodded. "Just organizing things." He smiled. "Good idea." "Yes, it was because tomorrow we were going to have a conversation." Dinner was quiet. Chicken, risa, the same meals we'd shared for years. Routine can be comforting, or terrifying, depends on what you know. Halfway through the meal, I placed the folder on the table. My son glanced at it. "What's that?" "Paperwork." He continued eating. "Important?" I slid the first page toward him. The fishing trip receipt. His chewing slowed. Then stopped. He didn't speak. Just looked at the document. Then at me. I placed the second page down. Phone records. Then the third. Life insurance policy. The silence stretched between us. Long. Heavy. His face drained of color. I watched him carefully. No anger. No accusations. Just observation. Finally he whispered, "You checked everything." I nodded once. "Yes." His hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From realization. He understood the moment. The trap. The truth. "Dad, But the words collapsed in his throat. I leaned back in my chair. Calm. Detached. "You planned it well." His eyes filled with something raw. Shame. Regret. Panic. "I wasn't going to push you in," he said quickly. I thought maybe I'd fall." The room went still. I folded my hands. "And you'd inherit everything." He couldn't meet my eyes anymore, which was interesting, because moments ago, he had been ready to bury me. My son sat frozen across from me, waiting for anger, for yelling, for something dramatic. But drama is messy, and I dislike mess, so I reached into the folder again and slid another document toward him. He looked down, confused, then his eyes widened. What is this?" "A new will." His breathing quickened. This says..." "Yes," I interrupted gently. "You're no longer the beneficiary." He stared at me like the floor had disappeared. "Where does it go?" I shrugged. "Charity." The word landed like a hammer. $4 million. Gone. Just like that. He stood suddenly. "You can't do that!" I tilted my head. "Can I?" His voice cracked. "I'm your son." "Yes." I nodded slowly. That's the disappointing part. The rage drained out of him, leaving only desperation. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "A big one." "People do." I stood up, collected the folder, walked toward the door. "Dad." I paused, but didn't turn around. "I was scared," he said quietly. "Of what?" "Being nothing." I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly, "You're about to learn what that feels like." And I left the room. I moved out 2 weeks later. New house, new city, no forwarding address. My son called dozens of times, then dozens more. Eventually, he stopped. Money can create loyalty, but it also reveals its absence. I sometimes wonder if he regrets it, not the plan, but the failure, because if I had fallen into that lake, if the water had swallowed me quietly, he would be living a very different life. But survival belongs to the cautious, the observant, the suspicious, and I have always been all three. So now I sit on the porch of a quiet house miles away from the life I used to know. Fishing rod beside me, lake in the distance, cold water, beautiful water. I smile sometimes when I think about Montana. Because my son thought the lake would kill me, but he misunderstood something important. The water wasn't the trap. He was, and in the end, he's the one who drowned.